That was the last thing Jake Carter remembered before everything went black. For a man who had been through the horrors of war, the sudden violence should not have caught him off guard. But the truth was, he had let his guard down. After years of service as a Marine, fighting battles in places the world barely remembered, he thought he had left that life behind. Now he was just another veteran trying to get by, relying on the company of his loyal service dog, Shadow, to keep him going. But danger had a way of finding him, even when he least expected it. The night had started like any other. Jake had been driving home from a quick supply run in his old pickup truck. The Arizona desert stretched endlessly on both sides of the road, a quiet darkness settling over the land. Shadow sat in the passenger seat, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings, ears perked up as if sensing something Jake could not. Then came the lights in his rearview mirror. At first, Jake thought it was just another truck passing by, but as the vehicle sped up and swerved into his lane, a chill crept down his spine. The next thing he knew, tires screeched, metal crunched, and his world spun violently. By the time his head slammed into the steering wheel, the darkness had already started to pull him under. When Jake woke up, he was no longer in his truck. His hands were bound, his head throbbed, and the air smelled of damp concrete and gasoline. He tried to move, but his body felt heavy, his limbs sluggish. His instincts screamed at him. Something was very, very wrong. A voice cut through the haze, rough and full of cruel amusement. "Look who finally woke up." Jake forced his eyes open and found himself staring at a group of men. They were dressed in dark clothes, their faces partially covered, and they carried weapons without a hint of hesitation. The realization hit him hard. He had been taken, one of them crouched in front of him, a smirk playing on his lips. "Welcome back, old man. You have no idea who you messed with." Jake said nothing, his mind already working through the situation. He had no doubt who these men were. The cartel had been expanding its operations, pushing further north, taking what they wanted without fear. And now, for whatever reason, they had him. But what they did not know was that he was not alone. Somewhere out there, in the vast desert night, Shadow was already tracking his scent. The men thought they had taken everything from him, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated the bond between a man and his dog, and Shadow was coming. Jake Carter sat still, his breathing slow and steady, his sharp mind pushing through the pain in his head. The cartel men stood around him, some talking in low voices, others checking their weapons like they had done this 100 times before. He was not their first victim, and he would not be their last. But unlike the others, he had something they could never expect. Shadow. Somewhere beyond these cold walls, his canine partner was already searching for him, following a scent that no one else could track. Jake knew Shadow, every habit, every instinct, every relentless drive the dog had. They had been through too much together. Shadow would not stop. He never did. A man stepped forward, someone who looked like he was in charge. He was older, his face weathered but still sharp. His dark eyes studied Jake like he was a puzzle to solve. "You are quiet," he said, his voice calm but filled with something dangerous underneath. "That tells me you are either smart or stupid. Which is it?" Jake did not answer. He knew better than to give them anything. The man chuckled. "Nothing? Fine. Let me tell you what I know about you then." He crouched down, resting his elbows on his knees. "You are an American soldier." "No, Marine, yes?" He nodded to himself, as if he had already confirmed it. "You fought in wars, saw things no man should see, and now you are just another forgotten veteran trying to live in peace. But peace is a lie, isn't it?" Jake clenched his jaw. He had heard men like this before, predators who thought they understood the world better than anyone else. They believed power came from fear, from taking what they wanted, but they never saw the ones who fought back until it was too late. The man continued. "My people," he gestured to the others in the room, "we have a way of dealing with problems, and right now you are a problem. We did not expect to find you on that road. Wrong place, wrong time. But now that you are here, maybe we find some use for you." Jake kept his expression blank, though his mind was racing. If they thought he was valuable, they might keep him alive long enough for Shadow to find him. He just had to hold on. One of the younger men near the door scoffed. "He is just a broken old soldier. What use is he?" The older man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That depends. Maybe someone will pay for him. Maybe he is more useful in other ways." Jake knew what that meant. He had seen what men like this did to people they captured. He had no intention of waiting around to find out what came next, but he had time. And time was all he needed. Outside, far from the dimly lit room where Jake sat, Shadow moved through the desert with a quiet, deadly focus. The scent was fresh, leading away from the wreckage of the truck and deeper into unfamiliar territory. His paws barely made a sound against the sand, his ears twitching at every distant noise. He had been trained for this. Years ago, when Jake first got him, Shadow had been more than just a companion. He had been a soldier, trained to track, to protect, to fight when necessary. And even though they were no longer in a war zone, that training had never left him. The truck that took Jake had left a trail, faint tire marks in the dirt, the scent of oil and sweat lingering in the air. Shadow followed without hesitation, his instincts driving him forward. He did not need commands, he did not need orders. He only needed Jake. Back inside the building, Jake shifted slightly in his chair, testing the bindings around his wrists. Tight, but not impossible. He had escaped worse situations before, but this time he was not alone. The younger man near the door was still watching him, arms crossed, impatient. "We should just get rid of him," he muttered. "He is not worth the trouble." The older man gave him a look, one that silenced any further argument. "You do not think. That is your problem. You react." He turned back to Jake. "But you are different. You know how to be patient. You are waiting for something." Jake said nothing. The man nodded as if confirming something to himself. "I do not like that." He stood up, dusting off his hands. "Take him to the other room, somewhere more secure, and check his pockets again. Make sure he has nothing on him." Two men stepped forward, grabbing Jake by the arms and pulling him to his feet. His legs were stiff, his body sore from the crash, but he forced himself to move naturally. He had to stay alert. As they dragged him out of the room, he caught a glimpse of the night sky through a barred window. It was dark, but he knew Shadow was out there. He could almost feel it. "Hold on, buddy," he thought. "Keep coming." Shadow was coming. And when he did, these men would realize they had made a mistake they could never take back. Jake was pushed into a smaller, dimly lit room, the concrete walls bare and unwelcoming. His mind worked fast, calculating his next move. Every time he was thrown into a situation like this, the old instincts kicked in: patience, observation, and waiting for the right moment. The room was quiet, save for the faint hum of an air conditioning unit struggling to keep the heat at bay. The two men shoved him roughly into a chair, each one taking a position beside him, their weapons now more apparent. The younger one paced, visibly agitated. Jake could feel the tension in the air, but he remained still, his body aching with every movement, his heart beating in slow, measured thumps. "You know," the younger man muttered, "I don't get it. Why not just end this now? He isn't going anywhere." Jake heard the older man sigh, his voice calm and almost bored. "Because we need leverage. The Americans will pay, they always do." Jake's pulse quickened at the mention of payment. He had been through enough bad situations to recognize a ransom when he heard it. The cartel thought they could get something. From his family, his estranged daughter, maybe even some old contacts he had left behind. They were wrong. No one cared enough to pay. But Shadow was different. The dog would not stop. And if Jake could buy enough time, Shadow would find him. The older man leaned forward slightly, studying Jake with a calculating gaze. "You are wondering why you are still alive, yes?" He grinned. "You think we do not know who you are. But you are not important, Carter. Not really. We just need to make sure you stay quiet until we make the call. Then you get to go home. But you will not be the same. No one comes back from the dead without being changed. Jake felt his muscles tense, but he forced himself to stay relaxed. If he reacted, it would be a mistake. The only chance he had was to keep them thinking he was weak, out of it, not a threat. A small laugh escaped the younger man. Home? Where do you think he's going, boss? These people don't care about old soldiers. The older man shot him a look, silencing the younger one immediately. Enough. Jake's mind wandered back to the days when he was still in the field, to the years spent chasing down insurgents and fighting in places most people would never hear about. He had seen enough death, enough brutality to understand how these men operated. It was never personal for them. They saw people as pawns, objects, nothing more. But Shadow was not just a dog. He was the only thing that Jake had left, and the cartel underestimated him. The younger man stood close now, staring at Jake. So what's your story, huh? You some kind of war hero or just another guy with a big ego? His voice was sharp, trying to provoke Jake, but he kept his face impassive. Jake didn't answer. He didn't need to. The longer they talked, the more likely it was they would slip up. The older man gestured to the door, signaling the younger man to leave. Keep him here. No one enters. I'll make the call when I'm ready. As the door slammed shut, Jake allowed his gaze to drift around the room. The air was thick with the smell of old sweat and dust. A single fluorescent light flickered above, casting erratic shadows across the concrete floor. His thoughts were racing. The situation was dire, but not over. He had to hold on. He had to trust that Shadow would find him. Outside, the night continued, its quiet watch. The desert stretched out endlessly, silent under the vast sky. Shadow was miles away, but his nose never wavered. In the distance, the lights of the cartel's compound twinkled faintly, a beacon to Jake's silent partner. Shadow's pace never slowed, his focus never shifted. He had been trained for this moment, for a mission like no other. His paws hit the ground with steady precision as he followed the scent, cutting through the desert like a shadow in the night. But it was not just the scent of Jake he followed. He could smell the danger too, a scent that made his hair stand on. And the men who had taken Jake were no strangers to violence. They had no intention of letting him go. If Shadow was going to find him in time, he would need to move quickly. Meanwhile, inside the compound, the older man sat behind a desk, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the surface. He was waiting for the call, waiting to hear the figure on the other end tell him how much he could get for Jake. A price was always set for someone like him, someone who had seen too much, done too much. They would pay, or they would not. It was all the same to the cartel. He stared at the phone, willing it to ring. The silence in the room was deafening. He could feel the pressure mounting, the tension stretching tighter and tighter until it threatened to snap. And then the phone rang. He picked it up quickly, his voice low but authoritative. Yes? There was a pause, and then the voice on the other end spoke in rapid Spanish, something about a delay, something about complications. The older man clenched his jaw. What do you mean, complications? The man is already here. The voice on the other end was apologetic but firm. There was an unexpected situation. We are making adjustments, but the Americans have not responded yet. We are not sure. He slammed the phone down in frustration. The last thing he wanted was for this deal to fall through. The Americans had a way of dragging things out, but they always paid in the end. And if they did not, there were other ways to make them comply. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching his office. The younger man, the one who had been so eager to kill Jake, burst into the room, his eyes wide with panic. Boss, he stopped, catching his breath. There's a problem. The older man narrowed his eyes. What kind of problem? The younger man swallowed hard. We found something. Something in the old man's truck. The older man raised an eyebrow. What? His dog, it's out there, and it's not alone. It's following us, and it's not normal. The older man's face turned pale, his heart suddenly pounding in his chest. Get him, the older man growled. Get Carter. Now. And get the damn dog before it's too late.